My roommate left her journal open on my bed, and before I understood what I was looking at, I'd already read the last line she'd written. It had my name in it. If I'd ever let myself expect anything, which I hadn't, on purpose for years, I'd have expected the words around my name to be ordinary. A note about the dishes. A reminder to split the electric bill. The small administrative weather of two people who share a bathroom and nothing else. That is not what it said. I closed the journal so fast I nearly tore the page, and I stood there in my own bedroom with my heart going like a hammer against a string. Because here's the thing about a sentence you weren't meant to read. You cannot unread it. And the sentence I'd just read meant that everything I'd believed about the last 2 years was a story I'd been telling myself to stay safe. She'd known. She'd known for a long time. She'd written it down in the one place on earth she trusted no one would ever look. And then, she'd left it on my bed. My name is Adam Walsh. I'm 35. I tune and repair pianos for a living, which means I spend my days inside the chests of instruments other people love and mostly neglect, hunting for the 1 string in 200 that's gone wrong. It's quiet work. It suits me. I can walk into a stranger's living room and tell you, inside of 4 notes, whether the piano in it has been loved or just owned. I have always been better at reading instruments than people. I'd like to tell you that changed eventually. It did. It just took me an embarrassingly long time and a journal I had no right to open. Her name was Wren. She'd been my roommate for 2 years and my friend for 6 before that, and the reason both of those things were true was a piano. She bought it at an estate sale on a whim, a battered old upright nobody else wanted, hauled up 3 flights by 2 movers who quit halfway and had to be bribed to finish. And then she called the only piano person in the listings, who was me, to make it playable. She never did learn to play it. Not 1 song in 6 years. She just liked having it there, she said, the way some people like a fireplace they never light. She was 32. She had a streak of gray at her left temple that she refused to dye, that she'd carried since she was 26 and wore like a dare. She wrote left-handed, so the side of her hand was always faintly blue with ink, and she read with a pen clamped in her teeth. And she left half-finished mugs of tea on every flat surface in the apartment, like she was marking territory. She edited other people's words for a living, a freelance proofreader, eyes on someone else's sentences 8 hours a day. Maybe that's why she filled a journal of her own by hand every night, a thick hardcover thing with a cracked spine that she carried from room to room and never. In 6 years, let a single living person read. I knew not to ask about the journal. That was the one rule of her I'd learned early and never once tested. Everything else about Wren was loud and open and constantly underfoot. The journal was the locked door in a house where every other door stood wide. I respected it. I told myself I respected it because I'm a respectful person. The truth, which took me 2 years and 1 accident to understand, is that I never opened that door because some part of me already suspected what was behind it, and I wasn't ready to learn I'd been loved that long without noticing. It happened on a Tuesday in the dead middle of August, the kind of week where the air conditioner did nothing but move the heat around and the whole apartment smelled like hot dust, and the lilies one of her clients had sent. Wren had been awake for something like 30 hours on a deadline, a textbook, 400 pages of other people's commas, and she'd finally gone down around noon, face first and fully dressed, in her room across the hall. I had laundry to put away. That's the entire heroic origin of it. I'd been meaning to change my sheets for a week, and I carried the clean stack down the hall, and I shouldered my own door open. And there it was, her journal, on my bed. Open, I want to be clear that I wasn't snooping. I didn't even understand for a second what I was looking at, My brain ran through a dozen innocent explanations before it landed on the right one. She'd been writing in here. On my bed. Maybe because hers was buried under the deadline. Maybe because my room was the cooler side of the apartment. Maybe, and this is the explanation I refused to let myself consider until much later, because some part of her had wanted to leave it exactly where I would find it. It was open to the last page she'd filled. And before I could stop my own eyes, which turned out to be faster than decency, I read the final line. Just the one. It had my name in it. And it had a word next to my name that we had never once said to each other in 6 years. Then, I shut it. Fast, like shutting it could put the sentence back. But you can't put a sentence back. I stood there in the heat, with the clean sheets still in my arms, and I understood that the floor of the last 2 years had just quietly dropped out from under me. Here is the part I'm not proud of, and also the only part I am. I didn't read the rest. I set the sheets down. I picked the journal up by its covers, the way you carry something you're afraid to wake, and I walked it across the hall and set it square on her desk, where she'd see it and assume she'd left it there herself. Then I went and sat on my unmade bed and did not read one more word, because reading the rest of it without her permission would have been a kind of theft, and the one thing I was certain of about Wren was that she'd trusted me with a locked door for 6 years, and I was not going to pick the lock just because it had happened to swing open on its own. That's the decent version. Here's the rest of it. I sat there for an hour with a single sentence burning a hole through me. I told myself it didn't change anything. People write things they don't mean at 3 in the morning on hour 30 of a deadline. It was the exhaustion. It was the heat. It was a line in a private book I was never meant to read, and which therefore, officially, did not exist. I am a man who can listen to 200 strings and find the one that's gone flat, and I sat on my bed and tuned out the single loudest note I'd ever heard in my life and called it respect. The thing about reading one true sentence is that it goes back and rewrites every sentence that came before it. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop the past from rearranging itself behind my back. The piano she'd never learned to play, the one she kept hauling from apartment to apartment for 6 years at considerable expense, I'd always chalked it up to sentiment about the estate sale. Now I wondered if she kept it because it was the reason she'd met me. And you don't throw out the reason you met someone if you can't bring yourself to throw out the someone. A few months, she'd said, 2 years ago, standing in my doorway with 2 suitcases and a half-dead houseplant after her lease fell through. Just till I find my own place. She had never once looked for her own place. I'd noticed and said nothing, because I liked her there, and I'd quietly filed liking her there under the harmless heading of liking not being alone. There was the guy from her gym, 2 summers back, who'd asked her out 3 separate times. I remembered teasing her about it. I remembered the careful, specific way she'd said she wasn't really looking for anything right now, and how completely I'd believed her, because believing her was easier than asking why a woman who wasn't looking for anything had been sharing a bathroom with me for over a year. I had, it was becoming clear, the romantic perception of a fence post. There were smaller things too, once I started counting, and I couldn't stop counting. The way she always knew when a job had gone badly before I said a word, and would have something ridiculous queued up on the TV by the time I got my boots off. The night 2 winters ago I'd had the flu and woken at 4 a.m. to find she'd left a glass of water and the good cough syrup and a single post-it on my nightstand that just said drink, idiot, and how I'd kept that post-it in my wallet for a year and told no one, not even myself, what keeping it meant. I had built an entire quiet life around this woman and labeled every brick of it convenient. And then there was the new thing, the thing that started the very next morning. She knew. Not that I'd read the line. She couldn't have known that. But she knew the journal had moved. I'd set it dead center on her desk. And Wren was the kind of person who knew where every object lived inside a chaos only she could navigate. And the second she clocked it an inch out of place, something in her went still. She got careful around me. Wren, who narrated her every passing thought to the radio, to the kettle, to me, went quiet for the first time in 6 years. We started moving around the apartment like two people diffusing the same bomb from opposite ends of the room. She still made my coffee, though, every morning, without being asked, the way she had for 2 years, too strong, the way I'd never once told her I'd come to prefer it precisely because she was the one who made it. She'd set it on the closed lid of the piano. And the morning after the journal moved, she set it down, and her ink-blue hand stayed on the mug a beat too long, like she was deciding whether to say something. Then, she didn't. She went back to her room and closed the door that was never, ever closed. That sound, her door clicking shut in the middle of a weekday, was the loudest thing in the apartment for 4 days straight. It went on like that. 4 days of a quiet that got heavier every morning, until the place that had always felt full of her felt like one long-held breath. The 4th night I couldn't sleep, and I got up for water, and she was already out there, sitting on the piano bench in the dark, in an old t-shirt, the journal shut in her lap with both hands laid flat on top of it, like she was holding it closed by force. She didn't look up when I came in. I didn't turn on the light. I just stopped in the doorway, and she sat at the piano she'd never learned to play, and the streetlight came through the blinds and laid pale stripes across the two of us. And for a long moment, neither of us said a single word. I watched her hands on the cover of that book. They weren't still. Her thumb moved back and forth along the cracked spine, the way it always did when she was working herself up to something she didn't know how to start. And I understood, standing there, that she knew that I knew, and that the two of us had arrived, by accident and by my own clumsy decency, at the exact door she'd kept locked for 6 years. Except this time, she was the one with her hand on the knob. I'd never seen her look uncertain before. That was the thing that undid me. More than the journal, more than the line. In 6 years I had watched Wren be furious and exhausted and helpless with laughter and grieving and stubborn past all reason. But I had never once seen her look like she didn't know what she was allowed to want. She looked like that now, in the dark, on a bench in front of an instrument she'd bought just to keep me near. And I'd have given anything to make it easier, except the one thing she needed was for me not to reach for it first. The whole apartment seemed to be waiting. The fridge hummed. A car went by outside and dragged its light across the ceiling and was gone. I could have spoken first. I almost did. But I'd learned a few things about Wren in 6 years, and one of them was that the moment you reached for her, she stepped back, and the only way to keep her in a room was to leave her the room to stay in. "You moved it," she said finally. Not a question. Her voice was low and careful, aimed at the piano keys and not at me. "You found it on your bed, and you moved it." A breath. "And I keep trying to decide whether you read it, and I keep landing on the fact that I don't actually want to know. Because if you didn't, then I have to say it out loud myself, and if you did, then you've spent 4 days being kind enough to pretend you didn't. I'm honestly not sure which one of those is going to wreck me more." That landed somewhere I didn't have a word for yet. She turned on the bench, finally, to face me, the journal still pressed flat to her chest like a shield she hadn't decided whether to lower. "I started writing about you the year we met," she said, quiet and even. "Not like that. At first it was just, Adam thinks the C above middle C on my piano sounds haunted. Adam eats cereal standing up at midnight like a raccoon. The dumb stuff. And then a couple of years ago, I went back and read it from the beginning, and I realized I'd been keeping a record of a person I was in love with and calling it a diary. Her thumb went still on the spine. I moved in to find my own place. You know I never looked. You've known that for 2 years, and you never once asked me why. And I decided your not asking had to mean the answer was no. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Not right away. There was a stillness opening up in my chest, that specific quiet a body drops into when it has understood something a half second before the mind agrees to sign for it. I was aware of my own hands hanging useless at my sides, and the strange far-off sound of my own pulse. And then, because the only instinct I fully trust in a moment that actually matters is to hand the other person a way out before I hand them anything else, I said it. Ren, you don't have to do this. I kept my voice level. You were running on no sleep. It was 3 a.m. That journal was never meant for me. We can call it that. You take it back. I forget the line I had no business seeing. And tomorrow, you make my coffee too strong, and neither of us ever mentions tonight again. That door's right there. I'll hold it open for you. I mean it. She stood up off the bench. She crossed the room, slow, and she set the journal down on the closed lid of the piano. Deliberately, out of her own 2 hands, the locked door finally left open on purpose, and she said, I don't want the door, Adam. I've had the door for 6 years. I'm so tired of the door. So I told her the truth I'd been tuning out since the afternoon I read 1 line of her handwriting. You bought a piano you can't play because it was an excuse to keep me in your life, I said. You've made my coffee every single morning for 2 years, exactly the way I never told you I'd started to like it. You read every word the rest of the world writes, all day, and you put your own down where you were sure no one would ever read them, and the one night you finally let it slip, the one place you left it, was my bed. My voice wasn't quite steady, and I let it not be. I've spent 2 years calling the best thing in my life a convenient roommate situation, because the real word for it scared me more than being alone did. You're not my roommate. You never were. You're the reason I come home. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something she'd been holding behind her teeth for 6 years. I crossed the last of the dark between us, and I didn't grab for her. I lifted her left hand, the ink-stained one, the one that had written all of it, and I pressed it flat against my chest where she could feel the hammering of what she'd done to me. And she let me. We stood there in the striped streetlight, not breathing. And then the piano made a sound. Neither of us had touched a key on purpose. But we both leaned back against the keyboard in the dark, and that old upright she'd never learned to play let out a low, ugly, gloriously untuned chord. The worst noise I'd heard come out of an instrument in 15 years of this, and Ren laughed straight into my shoulder, and I started laughing too, because of course the piano that started the whole thing would insist on having the last word. For the record, I told the top of her head, that is the most out-of-tune note in this entire apartment, and I am including the 2 of us. 3 weeks later, she still hadn't found her own place. Except now, neither of us bothered pretending that was ever the plan. She moved her desk into my room, our room, and left a mug of tea on my side of it that I knocked over approximately every other day, and we had a real, sincere argument about whether a woman who edits for a living should be allowed to correct her own boyfriend's grammar mid-sentence. She is. I lost that one. I lose most of them. A few months after that, the journal moved too. She didn't hide it anymore. She'd write at the kitchen table while I tuned some stranger's piano over the phone, the pen in her teeth, the gray streak falling forward across her eye, and once she caught me trying not to look, and she slid the whole thing across the table and said, "Read whatever you want." I closed it, and slid it back. Because some doors are better when you've been invited through them, and you choose to wait anyway. She still writes about me. Adam eats cereal standing up at midnight like a raccoon. I've read that one. It holds up. Years later, when people ask how we got together, she says I'm the only man alive who could find a love confession on his own bed and spend 4 days politely pretending he hadn't. I say she's the only woman alive who would confess to a man in writing, leave the evidence where he sleeps, and call it an accident. We're both right. The truth is, she left a door open that she couldn't make herself walk through, and I refused to walk through it without her. And the two of us stood on opposite sides of it for 6 years, until the night we finally opened it together. It wasn't new. It had probably always been her. What would you have done if you'd found your roommate's journal open on your own bed, with your name in the very last line? And have you ever loved someone for years and called it something smaller, just because the real word felt too big to say out loud? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.